Welcome back to Echoing Part 3 and our dive into the Equites of Rome. In Part 2, we explored Gaius Gracchus's judicial reforms and how they empowered the Equites, the Jugurthine War, and the rise of Marius, along with the growing contradictions in Roman society. And then finally, Drusus's attempt at reforms to address these tensions. But his assassination in 91 BC set Rome on a path of spiraling chaos. Drusus's death would ignite a chain reaction of violence that would continue for around the next 60 years, leading to the fall of the Republic. In the immediate aftermath of Drusus's assassination, the Italian allies who had fought alongside Rome in its wars for many, many years, but were still denied citizenship, launched a full-scale rebellion. Nearly half of Rome's allies, particularly in central and southern Italy, declared independence, forming their own rival state with their own senate, magistrates, and even their own currency. Rome faced a full-scale war against the very people who had served as its best and most loyal soldiers. The fighting was intense and devastating, with both sides suffering immense casualties. Rome's military was initially caught off guard, but eventually managed to regain the initiative through commanders like Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an ambitious aristocrat with a talent for command. Sulla led a brutal but effective campaign, crushing the rebellion with relentless sieges and decisive victories. Marius, at this point the Republic's most celebrated general, but crucially quite old and sort of on the way out, swept in last minute to take much of the credit that Sulla felt belonged to him. The war ended not in decisive victory for Rome, but actually in concessions by Rome, and laws were passed. In 90 BC, the Lex Julia was passed, and in 89 BC, the Lex Plautia Papiria was passed, and these granted citizenship to Italians who laid down their arms. By 88 BC, the revolt was largely over, but Italy was left absolutely devastated, with deep scars that would shape violent conflicts in the late Republic. The war's aftermath saw the integration of thousands of newly enfranchised Italians, but crucially, many thousands of new equestrians into the equestrian order, setting the stage for the further power struggles the equestrian order would be involved in the years to come. Sulla's success in the social war not only secured Roman dominance, but also set the stage for his growing ambition, bringing him into direct conflict with Marius and sparking the first of Rome's devastating civil wars. The social war and its consequences would be pivotal in transforming the equestrian order, integrating Italy's aristocracy into Rome's elite and reshaping the order equestre into a more structured and influential class. After the social war, citizenship extended to virtually all free Italians south of the Po River. This enfranchisement more than doubled the Roman citizen body and created an influx of new equites, as many of the local aristocrats of Italy's cities now met the property qualifications to be formally registered as equitae Romani by the censors. While Roman equites had traditionally been defined by their roles in business, military command, and public service, many of the new incorporated Italian equites retained strong local identities. Some pursued opportunities in Rome, seeking magistracies or forging political alliances, while others remained focused on their municipal affairs, leveraging their equestrian status to dominate local governance. Military service played a crucial role in bridging the gap between the Italian equites and Rome's institutions. Many of these men served as centurions, tribunes, and prefects in the Roman army, reinforcing their status while strengthening their connections to the state. These roles carried both prestige and practical advantages, offering a pathway to influence within Roman politics and society. The martial ideas of virtus, or courage, and military distinction remained central to equestrian identity, and many Italians emphasized their service in inscription and funerary monuments, highlighting their contribution to Rome's campaigns. Over time, this fusion of military prestige, economic power, and legal privilege helped solidify the equites as a distinct class separate from both the senatorial elite and broader plebeian citizenry. Unlike the Senate or plebs, the Equites lacked a clear ideological identity. However, by adopting symbols and values associated with Rome's cavalry elite, such as the gold ring, otherwise known as the annulus aureus, and the narrow striped tunic, known as the angustus claus, and the ceremonial trabaya, they created a distinct public identity. Legislative changes like securing the first 14 rows in theatres further solidified their privileged status, setting them apart from the wider citizen body. Despite their legal and social elevation, the new Italian Equites did not fully integrate into Rome's political machinery overnight. Their political participation was often limited by geography and opportunity. Most Italian Equites lived far from the capital, making regular involvement in Roman elections or Senate proceedings impractical. Instead, their engagement was often tied to specific legal or political disputes, as seen in cases like the trial of Plancius, where equestrian delegations from Italian towns travelled to Rome to support their fellow municipals. Cicero, himself a novus homo or new man, was from the Italian town of Arpinum, as we discussed in the last episode, and he championed the role of Italian Equites in his speeches, arguing that their dual identity as members of both the local patria and the Roman res publica was not a contradiction but actually a strength. Ultimately, the social war and its aftermath transformed the equestrian order from a relatively exclusive Roman class into a broader, more diverse elite that incorporated Italy's wealthiest and most ambitious citizens. While many Italian Equites maintained their regional loyalties, their growing role in military business and political life helped shape the order equestre into a more cohesive entity. Now, to pick up the story from just after the social war, we have Gaius Marius and Sulla, who were once allies, but now their rivalry became one of the most defining and violent rivalries in Roman history. Sulla's rising influence, especially after the social war, threatened Marius' position as Rome's most celebrated general. And the breaking point came in 88 BC. To understand what happened next and how the Equites were pivotal in this story, we'll quickly look at the causes of what triggers our next big event. The wealthy province of Asia, formerly controlled by the Attalid kingdom of Pergamum, was a financial powerhouse, and Roman equestrian tax collectors, or the publicani, ruthlessly exploited it to maximize their profits. By the late 90s BC, many cities in Asia were deeply indebted to Roman financiers, with crippling interest rates, enriching the equestrian class at the expense of local populations. This economic exploitation created widespread resentment against Rome, which Mithridates VI of Pontus, who was an ambitious and expansionist king, eagerly capitalized on. In 88 BC, Mithridates, presenting himself as liberator from Roman greed, channeled the public anger into a violent uprising, orchestrating what became known as the Asiatic Vespers, a carefully planned, region-wide massacre of Roman and Italian residents. In a single coordinated day of bloodshed, an estimated 80,000 people were slaughtered, many of them equestrian merchants, moneylenders, and tax collectors. This act not only eliminated Mithridates' potential enemies, but also trapped the local population as his allies, since they had now committed an irreparable atrocity against Rome and could no longer expect forgiveness. By binding the cities of Asia to his cause through bloodshed, Mithridates transformed their resentment into a full-scale rebellion, forcing them to stand with him as he launched a wider war against the Republic. Just like the Jugurthine War before, the equestrians were not going to watch their own class be massacred and their financial interests, which were tied to Asia's stability and great wealth, be damaged. And so the Equites demanded an immediate Roman retaliation. Their huge influence, by now obvious, put immense pressure on the Senate to act, and so the Senate did, giving the young and successful Sulla, who had proven himself just very recently in the social war, command of this new war in the east. This command would ignite the simmering feud and power struggle between Marius and Sulla, which was fundamentally about who controlled Rome's military commands and by extension the future of Rome's political order. At its core, it was a battle between the Senate and plebeian assembly, with the equestrian class playing a crucial role in this shifting power dynamic. The Senate had followed precedent. Consuls and senior magistrates were typically responsible for leading major military campaigns. Sulla, as consul, was the rightful commander by senatorial decree. However, Marius and his allies sought to undermine the Senate's authority by using the tribunate and the plebeian assembly to overrule its decision. The tribune, Publius Sulpicius Rufus, heavily supported by the equestrian class, proposed a law that transferred the command from Sulla to Marius, a direct challenge to senatorial control over military affairs. His allies also incited mobs of plebeians in the streets, bullying and threatening any senator or anyone in public life who tried to challenge this new law. This move was part of a broader struggle in which equestrians, emboldened by their growing wealth and influence, sought to pick sides between the Senate and plebeian power struggle to weaken senatorial power and expand their own role in decision-making, particularly in provincial and administrative financial matters. For Sulla and the Senate, this was existential, a threat to Rome's traditional power structures. If military commands could be reassigned through mob-driven legislation, the senatorial class would lose total control over the Republic's armies, leaving Rome vulnerable to demagogues and populist strongmen. Due to the violent mobs roaming the streets of Rome, Sulla ran away from Rome back to his legions, which were stationed at Nola. But instead of accepting defeat, he did what no Roman general had ever done before, is he took his legions and he marched on the city of Rome. Sulla's march on Rome in 88 BC was unprecedented and an earth-shattering moment in Roman history, marking the first time that a Roman general used his legions to seize power by force. It set a dangerous precedent, proving that brute military strength could overrule political authority, a lesson that later figures like Julius Caesar would follow. This was a direct violation of Rome's sacred laws, as no general was allowed to bring armed troops into the city. The soldiers, knowing that Sulla was their best chance at plunder and glory in the east, backed him wholeheartedly, and like we mentioned in the previous episode, Marius had changed the legions in such a way where the soldiers' loyalties were now bound to their commander, as opposed to the Senate. As he advanced towards Rome, Sulla sent envoys ahead to negotiate, but Marius responded by sending some armed mobs to block his approach. This only angered Sulla and strengthened his resolve. As he pressed forward with his troops, he used shock and speed to seize the city before Marius and his allies could mount an effective defense. For the first time in Rome's history, the streets ran red with the blood of its fellow citizens, slain not by foreign invaders but by fellow Romans. Sulla ordered his men to fight with no mercy, and they pursued Marius' forces throughout the city, cutting them down in brutal urban combat. Even the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the greatest temple in Rome, became a battleground. Realizing the situation was hopeless, Marius fled. Narrowly escaping capture and execution, he hid in the swamps of Ostia and later found refuge in Africa, while Sulla declared victory and seized total control of the government. With Marius gone and the city under his control, Sulla turned his attention to eliminating opposition and consolidating his grip on power. He started with Rufus, the tribune who had orchestrated the transfer of the Mithridatic command, and he was executed. His head was then publicly displayed in the forum, a clear signal that Sulla would show no tolerance for those who defied him and Rome. Other key Marian allies in the Senate were arrested and summarily executed, while those who managed to escape were exiled, stripping Marius' faction of any foothold in Rome. Sulla's anger extended to include many equestrians who had financial and political influence and had been behind the changing of the Mithridatic command. Some were executed, others were stripped of contracts and political privileges, effectively weakening their influence in Rome's financial system. By crushing his enemy equestrian power, Sulla ensured that the Senate, rather than wealthy financiers who didn't back him, would once again dominate state affairs. Sulla, however, still had unfinished business. He had marched on Rome to reclaim the command against Mithridates, and now, with no further obstacles, he intended to take his legions east. Before departing, he imposed strict laws to restore senatorial supremacy, including the measures that curtailed the power of the tribunes and reaffirmed the Senate's authority over military appointments. Confident that his reforms and allies could maintain order in his absence, Sulla left Rome, setting off to wage war against Mithridates. But with Sulla away, the equilibrium in Rome crumbled, and into this power vacuum stepped a vengeful Marius. Marius returned from Africa and aligned himself with a new character, Lucius Cornelius Cinna. Raising legions in Italy, they laid siege to Rome, and when the city fell, it came with a wave of retribution. Marius and his allies began a huge purge. Senators loyal to Sulla were butchered, property was seized. For the Equites, however, the return of Marius offered a glimmer of restoration. His re-emergence felt like a correction to Sulla's senatorial tyranny. In that brief moment of triumph, Marius secured his 7th consulship, a final symbolic gesture of domination. Yet it was short-lived. Within weeks he was dead, probably from old age or illness. Cinna remained in power, but the coalition that had reclaimed Rome was already fraying. The Equites had placed their hopes in Marius, but without him their position became again quite uncertain. Cinna's regime grew more autocratic by the day, and the economic chaos of civil war continued to erode equestrian stability. While the city reeled under the erratic dominance of Cinna and his allies, Sulla was forging his revenge in the east. Having crushed Mithridates' forces and bled Asia Minor dry with staggering indemnities, he now commanded not only veteran legions, but the kind of wealth that could purchase allegiances and loyalty on Roman soil. His eastern settlement may have been brutal, but it started to restore confidence amongst equestrians involved in overseas contracts, and some began to shift their sympathies back towards Sulla, not out of love, but out of necessity. In 83 BC, Sulla landed at Brundisium with 5 legions. Unlike his first march on Rome, this was no sudden desperate act. This time, it was a calculated return with gold, soldiers, and a cause. His stated aim was to restore order and punish those who had betrayed the Republic. And everyone knew what this meant. Cinna prepared his forces and went out to meet Sulla. However, he was killed by his own mutinous troops, and leadership of this Marian faction, as it was so called, was passed to Carbo and the young Gaius Marius the Younger. They both lacked the prestige and the clarity of purpose that had once driven Marius himself. By contrast, as Sulla advanced, he picked up support, not least from Pompey, a young nobleman who raised a private army and marched to join him. Others followed too. Sulla had returned not as a renegade but as a reconqueror. For many Equites, this second civil war was a moment of terrible miscalculation. Some had enriched themselves under the Marians and feared Sulla's wrath as he swept through Italy, winning battle after battle. The Marian forces crumbled in no time at all. In 82 BC, at the Battle of the Colline Gate, Sulla defeated the last major opposition and seized full control of Rome. What followed was retribution on a scale Rome had never seen before, and these were called the proscriptions. The proscriptions began. Lists of enemies of the state were posted in the forum, and their lives and wealth were forfeited, their names struck from memory, and their families ruined. Sulla's vengeance was not limited to senators. For the Equites, the message was chilling. Many had backed the wrong side, and now their property, their contracts, and even their lives were at risk. Entire fortunes vanished in a single stroke. Yet, there was a dark logic to it all. The confiscated wealth helped pay Sulla's veterans and shore up his political allies. Rome became a market of death, and the spoils redistributed with precision to Sulla's allies. Sulla then assumed the role of dictator for the writing of laws and the reconstitution of the state. Sulla was claiming to restore the Republic, but in truth it was actually a new order, shaped in his own image. Sulla's reforms struck at the very foundations of equestrian influence. The tribunate, once a key ally of the Equites in challenging senatorial dominance, was hollowed out, its powers curtailed, its prestige deliberately dismantled. More damaging still was the reversal of the judicial reforms of earlier decades. Control of the courts were handed back to the Senate, stripping the Equites of their hard-won dominance over legal proceedings. In doing so, Sulla severed one of the main avenues to which the commercial class had exercised real political power. No longer a balancing force between the Senate and the people, The Equites now found themselves politically marginalised, mistrusted by the patricians, vilified by the populares, and financially drained by years of civil conflict. Their fortune endured, but their voice in the Republic had been sharply muted. In the decades to come, as new men like Crassus and Pompey rose, the Equites would find new opportunities to reassert themselves. Sulla had tried to crush their influence, but in truth, his reforms struck only at the visible branches, not the roots. He could strip them of their seats on juries, weaken their allies in the tribunate, and deny them a political voice, but he could not dismantle the economic machinery that underpinned their power. Even as they were sidelined politically, they remained indispensable to the functioning of Roman life. More than that, they were flexible. Unlike the rigid aristocracy of the Senate, the Equites adapted. They built new alliances, backed rising generals, and quietly bankrolled the ambitious men who would soon owe them favours. In time, even the juries returned to them, not as a gift, but as a concession to necessity. The Senate, weakened by years of war and corruption, simply could not govern alone. The Equites had waited, endured, and when the moment came, they reclaimed what had been taken, not because Rome chose to restore them, but because Rome could no longer function without them. Sulla had subdued them, but never truly broke them. Their power had gone underground, not disappeared, and in the crumbling architecture of the late Republic, it was the Equites who quietly relaid the foundations. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next installment. If you'd like to support my work, you can buy me a coffee over at Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description.